2 weeks after I loaned my boyfriend $15,000 to start his business, I caught him on a rooftop bar with another woman, laughing, holding hands, and telling her she was just an investor I slept with. He didn't see me. I took a photo, canceled the wire transfer scheduled for Monday, and walked away. That was 6 months ago. This morning, he emailed me, "Can we talk? I'm in trouble. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be here, writing about something like this. But I guess life has a way of throwing curveballs at you. Let me take you back to when things seemed perfect. Or at least I thought they were. I met Jake at a mutual friend's housewarming party. He was charming, with an easy smile and a knack for making everyone around him feel special. We clicked instantly, bonding over our shared love for indie films and obscure bands. Our relationship moved quickly, but it felt right. He was always full of ideas, talking about his dreams of starting his own tech company. I admired his ambition and drive. Fast forward a year, Jake came to me with a business proposal. He had a plan to develop an app that he swore would revolutionize the way people interacted with their social media. I was skeptical at first, but his enthusiasm was infectious. He needed $15,000 to get things rolling, and promised me I'd see a return on my investment within a year. We were a team, or so I thought, and I wanted to support him. 2 weeks after I handed over the money, I found myself at a rooftop bar, there to celebrate a friend's promotion. That's when I saw him, Jake, with another woman. They were laughing, holding hands, and he was telling her she was just an investor I slept with. My heart dropped, and my stomach twisted into knots. He didn't see me. I took a photo, canceled the wire transfer scheduled for Monday, and walked away. That was 6 months ago. This morning he emailed me, "Can we talk? I'm in trouble." I stared at the email, my emotions a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and a tiny, unwelcome flicker of curiosity. Part of me wanted to ignore him, let him stew in whatever mess he'd gotten himself into. But another part, the part that once cared, deeply for him, was tempted to see what he had to say. I spent the morning replaying everything in my mind. How could I have been so blind? I thought back to the little things I ignored. The late-night meetings he couldn't talk about, the sudden trips out of town, all the red flags I had brushed aside, convinced that he was just working hard to make his dream a reality. Despite everything, I found myself wondering about the kind of trouble he was in. Was it financial? Had his business failed without the funds I was supposed to provide? Or was it something else entirely? My mind raced with possibilities, each more dramatic than the last. I decided to call my best friend Sarah for advice. She'd been there through the whole ordeal, offering a shoulder to cry on and a steady supply of wine when I needed it most. "Don't do it, Emma," she said firmly when I told her about the email. "He's only reaching out because he needs something from you. He didn't care about you then, and he doesn't care about you now." I knew she was right. Jake had shown his true colors, and I had no reason to trust him. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed closure. Maybe hearing him out would finally give me the peace I needed to move on. I took a deep breath and hit reply. "What do you want to talk about?" I typed, my fingers trembling slightly, over the keyboard. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The rest of the day dragged on, my mind half focused on work, half on the impending conversation. When my phone buzzed with a new email notification, my heart leapt into my throat. "Emma, thank you for responding. I messed up and I need your help. Can we meet in person?" "I promise it's not what you think." His words were vague, offering no real insight into his situation, but they were enough to pique my curiosity further. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him the following afternoon at a cafe we used to frequent. That night I tossed and turned in bed, my mind a flurry of emotions, anger, hurt, and a reluctant sense of anticipation. What could he possibly want from me now? And why did I care? The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my nerves on edge. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by as I waited for Jake to arrive. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing with the fear of what was to come. When he finally walked in, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him, my breath caught in my throat. He spotted me and offered a tentative smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I steeled myself, determined to remain composed and not let him see how much he'd affected me. "Emma," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, Jake?" he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what I did, but I'm desperate. The app, it failed. I owe a lot of money to some people who aren't exactly forgiving." His words hung heavy in the air between us, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had finally caught up with him. But as much as I wanted to revel in his downfall, I couldn't ignore the part of me that still cared. "Why should I help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked down, shame etched across his features. "I don't have a good answer for that. I hoped you might still care enough to give me a chance to make things right." I sat back, studying him. He looked genuinely remorseful, but I couldn't forget the hurt he'd caused me. I had to be smart about this, protect myself from getting dragged back into his chaos. "Let me think about it," I said finally, standing up to leave. "I'll be in touch." As I walked away, I felt a strange mix of empowerment and uncertainty. I'd faced him, listened to his plea, and now the choice was mine. But what would I do with it? I'll update when I can. Chapter 2, The Unraveling. Hey Reddit, I'm back with an update. I didn't expect so many of you to be invested in this mess of a situation, but your support has been a lifeline. Here's what happened after I walked away from that cafe. trying to process Jake's plea for help. After our meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Jake looked genuinely desperate, but there was a part of me that couldn't fully trust him. I spent the next few days replaying our conversation in my head, trying to piece together the truth from the fragments he'd given me. I decided to dig a little deeper. If there was one thing I learned from this whole ordeal, it was to trust my instincts. So I started by reaching out to a mutual friend who used to be close to Jake, someone who might have more insight into his current situation. "Hey Mark," I texted. "Do you have a minute to chat? It's about Jake." He replied almost immediately. "Sure, what's up?" We met later that evening at a quiet bar. Mark seemed surprised when I mentioned Jake's financial troubles. "I haven't heard from him in months," Mark admitted, taking a sip of his beer. "Last I knew, he was doing pretty well. He always talked about how his app was going to be the next big thing." I frowned, feeling more confused than ever. "He told me it failed and that he's in debt. Does that sound like something he'd lie about?" Marky shrugged, a thoughtful look on his face. "Jake's always been a dreamer, Emma, but he's also been known to exaggerate or bend the truth when it suits him. If he's in trouble, it might be worse than he's letting on." His words left me with more questions than answers, but they also reinforced my decision to be cautious. I needed more information before making any decisions about helping Jake. Over the next few days, I did some sleuthing online. I found a few articles about Jake's app launch, but nothing recent. It was like his project had just vanished into thin air. I even checked his social media, which was uncharacteristically silent. For someone who used to post about every little achievement, the radio silence was unsettling. Then, out of the blue, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "For your eyes only." My heart raced as I opened it, half expecting it to be some sort of scam, but instead it was an anonymous tip-off about Jake's business dealings. The email claimed that Jake had been involved in some shady partnerships, the kind that could land him in serious legal trouble. The email detailed how Jake had taken money from several investors under false pretenses, promising returns that never materialized. It painted a picture of a man who was drowning in his own deceit, desperately trying to keep his head above water. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was more than I had bargained for. If this information was true, Jake's problems were far deeper than just a failed app. He was entangled in a web of lies that could have serious consequences. I sat back staring at the screen, my mind racing. Should I confront Jake with this information? Or should I walk away and let him deal with the mess he'd created? I was torn between the urge to help him and the need to protect myself from getting dragged down with him. That night, I barely slept, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. I couldn't ignore the fact that, despite everything, a part of me still cared about Jake. But I also knew I couldn't let that cloud my judgment. The next morning, I decided to reach out to Sarah again. I needed her level-headed perspective to help me navigate this complicated situation. "Emma, this is serious," she said after I shared the details with her. "If he's involved in something illegal, you need to be careful. You can't let him drag you into his mess." I nodded, knowing she was right. But there was still a part of me that felt compelled to confront Jake with what I knew. Maybe it was the closure I needed, or maybe it was a misguided sense of loyalty. Either way, I knew I had to see this through. I sent Jake a text asking to meet again. This time, I chose a public park, somewhere open and neutral. As I waited for his reply, I couldn't help but feel a mix of dread and anticipation. What would he say when confronted with the truth? Would he come clean, or would he continue to spin his web of lies? His response came quickly. "I'll be there." The day of our meeting, I arrived early, my heart pounding with anxiety. I watched as families played nearby, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension I felt inside. When Jake finally arrived, he looked even more worn than before, his eyes shadowed and weary. "Emma," he greeted me, his voice tinged with apprehension. I didn't waste any time. "Jake, I know about the investors. I know about the lies. Why didn't you tell me the truth?" His face paled, and for a moment I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was as if he was finally stripped of the facade he'd been hiding behind. I didn't know how to," he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could fix it before anyone found out." I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. "You should have been honest from the start. You dragged me into this without giving me a choice." He nodded, a defeated look on his face. "I know, and I'm sorry, Emma. I really am." For the first time, I saw the weight of his actions truly hit him. It was as if the reality of his situation had finally sunk in, and he was left with nothing but the consequences of his choices. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. "Jake, I can't help you. Not like this. You need to face the music and deal with what you've done." He looked down, his expression one of resignation. "I understand. Thank you for at least hearing me out." As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I'd done what I could, and now it was up to him to make things right. It was time for me to move on and focus on rebuilding my life, without the shadow of his betrayal hanging over me. I'll update when I can. Chapter 3, Planning and Preparation. Hey Reddit, I'm back with another update. Thanks for sticking with me through this roller coaster. After the confrontation in the park, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. I had finally faced Jake, but his problems were far from over, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of it. Here's what happened next. After leaving the park, I spent the next few days trying to focus on my own life. I threw myself into work, hoping the distraction would help me forget the tangled mess that was Jake's situation. But despite my best efforts, His words kept echoing in my mind. I knew I had to protect myself, but there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the need to see this through. I started by gathering information, trying to piece together the full scope of what Jake was involved in. The anonymous email had given me a starting point, but I needed more concrete evidence. I decided to reach out to a lawyer friend of mine, Alex, who specialized in corporate law. If anyone could help me understand the legal implications of Jake's actions, it was him. "Hey, Alex," I called him one evening. "I need some advice on a situation involving a former friend. It's complicated." He agreed to meet me for coffee the next day. As I explained everything to him, he listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "Emma, this sounds serious," he said, his brow furrowed. "If Jake misled investors, he could be facing fraud charges. You need to be careful about how involved you get." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I had suspected as much, but hearing it from a professional made it all the more real. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "First, make sure you have all the evidence you can gather. Emails, documents, anything that proves his deception. And if he tries to involve you further, you need to be clear about your boundaries." I nodded, grateful for his advice. It was time to take action, to protect myself and ensure that Jake's mess didn't spill over into my life. I spent the next few days combing through old emails and messages, looking for anything that might be useful. It was a tedious process, but it gave me a sense of control over a situation that felt overwhelmingly chaotic. But as I delved deeper, I encountered complications. Some of the emails I needed had been deleted, and my attempts to recover them were met with frustrating roadblocks. It felt like every step forward was met with 2 steps back, and my resolve was tested at every turn. One evening, as I sat at my desk, surrounded by papers and my laptop, I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. What if I couldn't gather enough evidence? What if Jake's problems became my own? The fear was paralyzing, and for a moment, I considered walking away entirely. But then I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal and hurt that Jake had caused. I couldn't let him get away with it, not without at least trying to hold him accountable. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of my strength and determination. I decided to reach out to Sarah once more, knowing her unwavering support would help me regain my focus. "Sarah, I need your help," I texted her. "Can you come over?" She arrived later that evening, armed with snacks and her usual no-nonsense attitude. We sat on my couch, surrounded by the evidence I'd gathered, and she listened patiently as I explained my plan. "Emma, you've got this," she said, her voice firm and reassuring. "You've already come so far. Don't let a few setbacks stop you now." Her words reignited the fire within me, and together we spent the next few hours organizing everything I had. It was a painstaking process, but with Sarah's help, I felt more confident than ever. As the night wore on, I realized that this experience had changed me. I was no longer the naive girl who had blindly trusted Jake. I was stronger, more resilient, and determined to see this through to the end. By the time Sarah left, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had a plan, and I was ready to put it into action. The next step was to confront Jake one last time, to show him the evidence and give him a chance to come clean before things escalated further. I sent him a text, requesting a meeting in a public place. I knew this was risky, but I needed to give him one final opportunity to do the right thing. His response was immediate. "Okay, let's meet tomorrow." The anticipation of our meeting filled me with a mix of anxiety and determination. I knew this was my chance to finally put everything on the table and see if Jake was willing to face the consequences of his actions. The next day, I arrived at the designated location, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. I had prepared for this moment, and I was ready to stand my ground. When Jake arrived, he looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if expecting the worst. I wasted no time in laying out the evidence in front of him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Jake, this is everything I've found," I said, my gaze unwavering. "You need to come clean, or this will only get worse for you." He stared at the papers, his face a mask of disbelief and fear. For a moment, I saw the facade crumble, and the weight of his actions seemed to crash down on him. I didn't realize it had gotten this bad," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have a choice, Jake," I said, my tone firm. "You can either face this head-on and try to make amends, or you can continue to run from it. But know that I'm done being a part of your deception." He nodded slowly, his expression one of resignation. "I understand, Emma. Thank you for giving me a chance to fix this." As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I'd done everything I could, and now it was up to Jake to decide his path. I was ready to move on, to focus on my own life and leave his chaos behind. I'll update when I can. Chapter 4. The beginning of action. Hey Reddit, I'm back with another update. It's been a whirlwind since my last post, and I'm grateful for all the support and advice you've given me. Here's what happened after I confronted Jake with the evidence of his deceit. After walking away from that last meeting with Jake, I felt a strange mix of empowerment and dread. I'd presented him with the truth, and now the ball was in his court. But as much as I wanted to believe he'd do the right thing, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of messages from Jake. He was panicking, his words a jumbled mess of apologies and pleas for help. It was clear that the reality of his situation had finally hit him, and he was scrambling to find a way out. "Emma, please, I need your help," one message read. "I don't know what to do." I felt a pang of sympathy, but I knew I had to be strong. I couldn't let myself get pulled back into his chaos. I took a deep breath and replied, "Jake, I've done all I can. It's time for you to take responsibility for your actions." His response was immediate, and it was clear he was desperate. "I know, but I'm scared. I don't know how to fix this." His vulnerability tugged at my heart, but I reminded myself of everything he'd put me through. I couldn't let his fear cloud my judgment. I had to stay focused on my own life and protect myself from his mess. Over the next few days, I tried to distance myself from the situation. I focused on work, spent time with friends, and tried to reclaim the parts of my life that had been overshadowed by Jake's betrayal. But despite my best efforts, I couldn't completely shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. Then, one evening, I received a call from Alex, my lawyer friend. "Emma, I think you need to hear this," he said, his voice serious. He explained that he'd been doing some digging of his own and had uncovered more about Jake's business dealings. Apparently, Jake's partners were starting to get nervous, and there were rumors that legal action might be on the horizon. "Emma, this could get ugly," Alex warned. "If Jake doesn't come clean soon, things could escalate quickly." His words sent a chill down my spine. I knew I had to act fast to ensure that I wasn't dragged down with Jake's sinking ship. I decided to reach out to him one last time to see if there was any chance of him coming clean before it was too late. I sent him a message asking to meet again. This time I chose a quiet cafe, hoping the familiar setting would help him open up. When he arrived, he looked more disheveled than ever, his eyes shadowed with fear. "Emma, I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Jake, you need to take responsibility. You can't keep running from this." He looked down, his expression one of defeat. "I know, but I'm scared of what will happen if I do." I felt a flicker of sympathy, but I knew I had to be firm. "Jake, you have to face this. It's the only way to start making things right." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I'll try, Emma. I promise." As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I'd done everything I could to help him, and now it was up to him to take the next steps. I was ready to move on, to focus on my own life and leave his chaos behind. But as much as I wanted to believe that this was the end, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to come. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew I had to be prepared for whatever might happen next. I'll update when I can. Chapter 5. Resolution and New Beginning. Hey Reddit, it's been a journey, and I'm here to share what I hope will be the final chapter of this saga. After my last update, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, torn between the past that had haunted me and the future I desperately wanted to embrace. In the days following my last meeting with Jake, I tried to focus on moving forward. But as much as I wanted to close this chapter of my life, a part of me was still tethered to the chaos he'd left behind. The anxiety of not knowing what would happen next gnawed at me, but I was determined to see this through. I was at work, trying to concentrate on a project, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Alex, my lawyer friend. The subject line read, "Urgent, update on Jake." With a mix of dread and determination, I opened the email. Alex had attached a series of documents detailing the latest developments in Jake's case. It seemed that his partners had finally taken legal action, and Jake was now facing charges for fraud and misrepresentation. My heart sank, but there was also a sense of vindication. He was finally being held accountable. I sat back in my chair, processing the information. There was a time when I would have felt compelled to rush to his aid, but now I knew better. I had done everything I could, and it was time to let go. I had to trust that he would find his way through this, even if it meant facing the consequences alone. Later that evening, I called Sarah. She'd been my rock through all of this, and I needed her perspective to help me process everything. As we sat on my couch sipping tea, I shared the latest news with her. "Wow, Emma, it sounds like things are finally coming to a head," she said, her voice a mix of relief and empathy. "Yeah, it's a lot to take in," I admitted, feeling the weight of the past months lift ever so slightly. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've done everything you could. Now it's time to focus on you." Her words resonated deeply, and I realized how much I'd been neglecting my own needs in the midst of all this drama. I had allowed Jake's chaos to overshadow my life for too long, and it was time to reclaim my own narrative. The following week, I made a conscious effort to rebuild. I started by reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with, people who had been pushed to the periphery as I dealt with the fallout of Jake's betrayal. It felt good to laugh and share stories without the shadow of his deception looming over me. I also threw myself into my work, finding solace in the projects that had once been my passion. The more I focused on my own goals, the more I felt the pieces of my life falling back into place. It was as if I was rediscovering the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of the past. One evening, as I was organizing my apartment, I stumbled across an old photo of Jake and me. We were smiling, carefree, unaware of the storm that would eventually tear us apart. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of peace. I realized that while Jake had been a significant part of my life, he no longer defined it. In the weeks that followed, I received sporadic updates about Jake's case. He'd been given a chance to make amends with his investors, and it seemed he was taking steps to rectify his mistakes. It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a start. And for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much I'd grown. This experience had taught me the importance of boundaries, of trusting my instincts, and of prioritizing my own well-being. I was no longer the person who would blindly follow someone into chaos. I was stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace whatever came next. As I write this, I'm filled with a sense of hope and anticipation for the future. I've learned that healing isn't linear, and growth often comes from the most unexpected places. While Jake's betrayal had been painful, it had also been the catalyst for my own transformation. Thank you, Reddit, for being my sounding board through this journey. Your support and advice have been invaluable, and I'm grateful for the community that has rallied around me. As I close this chapter, I'm excited to see where life takes me next. I'm ready to embrace new opportunities, to forge new connections, and to continue growing into the person I'm meant to be. Here's to new beginnings. Chapter 6, Resolution and New Beginning. Hey Reddit, it's been a long road, but I'm here with what I hope will be the final update in this saga. After everything that's happened, I feel like I'm finally stepping into the light after a long, dark tunnel. Here's how it all wrapped up. After learning about the legal action against Jake, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that justice was finally being served, and anxiety about what this meant for him and indirectly for me. I knew I had to brace myself for what might come next, but I was also determined to focus on my own life. A few days later, I received a call I hadn't anticipated. It was from Jake. I hesitated before answering, my heart pounding. Part of me didn't want to hear what he had to say, but another part felt it was necessary for closure. Emma, he began, his voice sounding more subdued than I'd ever heard it. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. I was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Jake, I hope you're taking this seriously, I finally said, my voice steady. I am, he replied, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. I'm working with my lawyers to make things right. It's not easy, but it's what I have to do. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I hope you find your way through this, Jake. Thank you, Emma. I'm sorry for dragging you into this mess. I never wanted to hurt you. His words hung in the air, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I know, I said softly, but it's time for both of us to move on. We ended the call on a note of mutual understanding, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was as if a chapter of my life had finally closed, leaving room for new beginnings. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I started attending a yoga class, something I'd always wanted to do, but never found the time. It became a sanctuary for me, a place where I could clear my mind and reconnect with myself. I also took up painting, a hobby I'd abandoned years ago. The act of creating something from nothing was therapeutic, and I found myself lost in the colors and textures, my worries melting away with each brushstroke. Meanwhile, my career began to flourish. With Jake's chaos no longer overshadowing my life, I was able to pour my energy into projects I was passionate about. I even received a promotion, something I'd been working towards for years. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I'd come. The betrayal that had once consumed me now felt like a distant memory. I'd learned so much about myself through this ordeal, about my strength, my resilience, and the importance of setting boundaries. I realized that while Jake's actions had been hurtful, they had also been the catalyst for my own growth. I was no longer the person who would blindly follow someone into chaos. I had found my voice, my courage, and my independence. As I write this, I'm filled with a sense of hope and anticipation for the future. I've learned that healing isn't linear, and growth often comes from the most unexpected places. While Jake's betrayal had been painful, it had also been the catalyst for my own transformation. Thank you, Reddit, for being my sounding board through this journey. Your support and advice have been invaluable, and I'm grateful for the community that has rallied around me. As I close this chapter, I'm excited to see where life takes me next. I'm ready to embrace new opportunities, to forge new connections, and to continue growing into the person I'm meant to be. Here's to new beginnings.